St. Patrick's Day has come. It's the time to celebrate the man who stood upon those lands, forever changing Ireland's fate. I'm sure you've heard the stories of how he came onto the isle, and in his years of slavery faced a great and many trial. Praying for salvation, for freedom from his yoke, and in time a voice did come, of his journey home it spoke. He listened unto this command, and soon made for the shore, where a boat awaited that young man, which would take him home once more. Back with his mother and his father, he felt his toil was now done, but there were other plans for dear Patrick, and his work had just begun. When he returned to Ireland, he was a wiser, older man. To bring Christ to those who'd bonded him, indeed it was his plan. He spoke the words, he fought demons, throughout the hills, the towns and lakes. But the act that he's remembered for is chasing off the snakes. He drove them from the island and down into the sea. From whatever evil they would bring, Ireland would be free. But as the snakes retreated, there came a voice within the tide. It threatened those upon the land from every coastal side. They would not see it coming, for the ocean it is vast, and it would come back every year until it devoured everyone at last. Plans were placed in motion to keep this demon kin at bay, so every year they could ensure in the ocean it would stay. Each and every year, when St. Patrick's Day came round, several monks were set to task, for the coastline they were bound. They placed a standing cross in the ground towards the water, in hopes that this would quell that beast and avoid its promised slaughter. There are many who believe this act to purely be symbolic. Others could not care a bit and prefer something alcoholic. It makes sense that they might think this way, as the act's a secretive affair, and most prefer to stay inland where they can party without care. But for one monk in particular, whom some many years ago had learned this task's importance more than anyone would know. We do not have a name, for that has been lost to time, which is truly such a shame that it borders on a crime. We know he was a younger man, early 30s is the guess. It was at this age that he was set to see the task was a success. He'd made his way onto the coast of Ireland's western shore and set himself a makeshift camp, preparing what he'd been sent for. The eve was March 16th, and the monk was at the ready to drive the cross into the shore and ensure that it was steady. With a fire heating up his bones and stew to ease his stay, he sat contently on the sand and watched the sun descend away. As darkness fell, the cross did stand, and the monk felt reassured that the night would go successfully, and that all was now secured. This place it was so quiet, save the washing of the waves, finding peace in praying that his brothers held their enclaves. He was reluctant to fall into sleep, for his duty he held dear. What if something were to go wrong? This scenario he did fear. But his camp it was so cozy, and the road had been too long. His eyes were feeling heavy still. He tried so hard to just stay strong. Each time he had felt a yawn, he'd give himself a shake. He'd clap his face and walk around, doing all to stay awake. But after many hours of his vigilant upkeep, his body couldn't take much more and forced him into sleep. A slight chill in the air carried gently on the wind. but he was warm inside his camp, even as the fire dimmed. At rest and undisturbed, within his sheltered camping ground, the ocean's gentle rise and fall brought a calm and soothing sound. But a rolling thunderous strength was now growing in the breeze, and a grateful eye beneath the waves saw opportunity to seize. How long the monk had been asleep was passing on to hours. Sheltered well he did not feel the rain coming down in showers. The wind as well was picking up, and despite its rising bluster, the weary monk was slumbering, so deep he did not muster. The waves were crashing with great strength onto the now bombarded beach. The water pushed up on the sand and outstretched the ocean's reach. A flash then struck across the sky, and a roll of thunder broke, its roar so loud and terrible that the monk had fast awoke. His mind was shocked and muddled from the storm's thunderous blare, but the weather was his least concern, as he soon became aware. There was very little light to help, though the sky was darkened blue. He'd been at rest for far too long, so from his camp he flew. The hail of rain did hammer down and began to soak his hood. Still he pressed on through the rain, for where the cross was stood. The cold and heavy wind threw the sea into the air. He wiped the water from his eyes, to a sight that truly scare. Those great and angry ocean waves were far closer than before, thrashing, clashing, splashing round, and swallowing the shore. And as if that wasn't bad enough to add to the monk's plight, the cross that had stood in the sand was now completely gone from sight. Panic coursed through his soul, his mind, his bones and veins. He felt a fear so terrible, it pricked his body so with pains. It must be found, no matter what, he told himself this fact. There was only but one option left, and so quickly he did act. He stepped into the rising tide, and started to wade through. Perhaps it was still in the sand, sinking as the waters grew. He was waist deep in the icy drink. It splashed and pushed him round, but the monk kept trudging on, and was sternly making ground. At last he reached the place he felt that the cross had stood so prior, yet as he felt and searched around, the result seemed very dire. He moved his feet to sweep the bed, to find where it might be concealing, as the coldness from the stormy sea began to numb him of his feeling. This was all for naught, it wasn't there, so just where could it be? A dreadful thought rang through his mind, that it was now lost to the sea. He strained his eyes as best he could, as he continued searching on. It must be here, I swear it's so, I won't accept it's gone. His hope was hanging by a thread, no matter how it seemed, and staring into the expanse, he noticed something gleamed. It startled his attention, and through tired, stinging eyes, he saw a brief shape of the cross break a wave upon the rise. That was it, that's where it is. This was his greatest shot, and now with destination set, he gave it all he'd got. Step by step, he all but felt that the floor was getting deep, so soon he had to swim on now. In his sights the cross he'd keep. It must be getting closer now, just keep going, this thought rung. He swam and spat out salt water, which was bile upon his tongue, stretching out each sweeping arm as fast and far as much, desperate to find the cross, until then he felt its touch. Reacting with much urgency, his reach he did expand. Suddenly, with great relief, he held it in his hand. The relief it washed so over him, like that cold tormenting sea. And now he could get back to shore. From this nightmare he'd be free. However, as he went to take a stroke and begin his journey fast, he felt a brushing on his leg, like something moving past. He held still for a moment and simply floated on the spot. The waves did bob him up and down. He tried not to move a lot. Yet as he remained buoyant, he thought that it might just be in his mind. That is, until it came again, and several times in kind. Those long, quick-moving bodies, they were cold as well as smooth. He would not stay to find out what. It now was time to move. Holding tight onto the cross, he swam with all his force. No matter what may swim beneath, he must maintain his course. Those things within the water could still be felt as they swam by. He could feel them pass on by his arms, his chest, each leg and thigh. A pain coursed through the monk's left leg. He kicked out as if to fight. One of the devils from the deep gave him a nasty bite. The sting was truly painful, like a cold and sharpened knife, but he had to make it back to shore and swam on through his strife. The splashing and the thunder, the vast heavy downpour, all these sounds were cancelled out by a great and hellish roar. The monk did hold and turn around, but regretted this decision at the monstrous shape that had emerged and held captive his vision. Far out in the ocean, like a tall and shifting spire, it was her. She'd come at last with her hungering desire. A giant demon serpent, before whom all courage breaks. In old tongue she's Máthair Nathair, the mother of the snakes. Standing tall, she reached so high, the monk had not been so distressed, and while he could not see her eyes, he knew on him they rest. Without another sound, she did dive into the water, heading straight on for the monk, so to begin her slaughter. This reality was clear, and so using all his might, he dragged himself on through the waves, and on he'd fight. She was fast gaining upon him. He knew but didn't look. He had to make it back to shore, no matter what it took. The chilling, biting seawater did wash him to and fro, but the shore it was now closing in, and he could feel the sand below. He strained to stand up from the sea, and fought to find his feet. If he could make it to dry land, his quest would be complete. He waded ever onwards, when behind him she did call, and he felt more stinging in his legs that caused the monk to stall. The creatures swimming, winding round, were a flurry neath his waist. They struck and pained him with a pass, but he knew he must make haste. Every step was agony, so putting weight upon the cross, he limped on into the shallows as the waves did splash and toss. The water at his ankles, the monk could barely stand. Even now, with all that pain, he was so close to dry land. Finally, but feet away, the serpents could no longer reach. His bloodied legs would find relief when the cross stood in the beach. His feet now felt the air. The time to act was nigh, so with what strength did still remain, he raised the cross up high. He wanted to just put it down, his mind and body stressed, but was stopped in place before he could, at a dull pain, in his chest. Slowly lowering his head, he saw the source of harm. The fangs of the great serpent pierced his chest below each arm. A hiss reverberated, sending chills throughout his core. He felt the fangs deplete his strength as into him they bore. A staunch weariness came over him, and through bloodshot, tired eyes, he saw the snakes emerging forth onto land to claim their prize. His arm still holding up the cross, his whole body ached and pounded. Even so, with one last push, he threw the cross into the ground. The cross fell heavy to the sand and almost came to fall, but it had depth and strength enough that it could still stand tall. That awful serpent mother, her fangs she did retract. She began to scream and flail as though being attacked. The snakes upon the surface too did writhe and fiercely thrash. All of them turned back at once, for the ocean they did dash. The monk, now free from vicious fangs, he tried to push himself away, but his body had no strength to lend, and so he fell upon the bay. As they fled into the water, she roared and struck the air, as though fighting off an adversary. Only she knew that was there. This behavior didn't last too long, as she waned from the attack. With a hiss and crash she whipped around and quickly drifted back, glaring, hissing at the beach as she slowly did submerge. There came a voice from out that beast, whose warning coldly surged. Slumped and bleeding on the sand, the monk had heard her say, "If not this year, I'll take the next. In the end, I'll have this day." The atmosphere fell quiet from having now made her decree, and her hellish monstrous form sank back into the sea. The storm and rain that held the night, through which he suffered harm, both did soon alleviate. The sky and sea were calm. Frigid, wet, and losing blood, barely opening his eyes, he felt a warmth within the cold as the sun began to rise. The light and little heat shone down, which brought comfort to the pain, a grateful gift to know it's done. His sight and breath did wane. The monk rested on the sodden sand and looked up towards the sun. Breathing deep, he closed his eyes. His duty was now done. Good day, I'm Joe19 and thank you for listening. So, what did you think of Máthair Nathair? I really hope I've been pronouncing that correctly. Hopefully it will have you enjoying your St. Patrick's Day celebration even more. Though probably not. After all, nothing quite disrupts a party like an ancient bloodthirsty sea demon, as I'm sure you already know. Regardless, I hope you all have a fantastic day wherever you are and whatever you're doing. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, then perhaps subscribe, leave a like, and if you're feeling particularly cheeky, maybe even a comment. I do hope that you'll join me again. Stay safe, sleep well, but remember, here we make monsters.